Okay, good morning again. Let's get started. The first thing we want to do before we start here, get the slides to work. There we go. Just to quickly go over the agenda with everybody, Joe D'Alessandro will be joining us in just a moment to welcome us. Planning for the recovery is Adam Sachs' presentation from Tourism Economics. We unfortunately just heard from Janet Lamkin this morning that she had an emergency, so we won't have the United Airlines California update due to Janet's emergency. Then we'll go through the SF travel forecasts and updates. That'll be Brett Aller. We'll do our international forecast with Hubertus and Daniel. Melissa is here from SFO to give an update on what's going on at the airport. And then Lynn Bruni-Perkins will tell us about the recovery marketing programs that we're putting in place, and then have closing remarks. So without any further ado, we will start with Joe.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really glad to have you all joining us today in this virtual outlook. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe and keeping your spirits up. I know we're all having some challenging times, unprecedented times, but it's important that we keep our eye on the long-term recovery that we will be going through. So I want to thank our staff at San Francisco Travel for being so agile and creative and for adapting this really valuable annual conference to a virtual format. I do miss seeing all of you at UCSF Mission Bay, where we normally do this, but I'm glad we're able to continue to provide you with this critical knowledge and update about what's going on, and our best ability to give you a forecast of what we can look forward to. I really want to thank our guest speakers, Adam Sachs and Melissa Andretta, for embracing the change and joining us today from all over the country. After today's event, all attendees will receive a short survey. By completing the survey, you'll be granted access to parts of today's program that we have permission to share. So we really encourage you to look for the survey when it comes out and to complete it so you can get more information that you can have. So, you know, for the last 11 years at this conference, I got up and told you that we had record-breaking numbers and how positive the outlook was. What a difference a year makes. It's a scary, scary time for travel and tourism. You know, we're well into uncharted territory, and while I'm very impressed and inspired by how we've been able to manage so far, the truth is that there's still many unknowns ahead. The evolving coronavirus situation makes 2020 a difficult year to project. COVID-19 has affected every sector across the globe, and the hospitality industry is among the hardest hit, actually by far the hardest hit. Our research suggests that recovery to pre-COVID-19 levels could take until 2024. So those are serious issues and serious numbers. And in our industry in the modern times has never experienced anything close to this. We will get through it, but it's going to take a lot of coordination. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to take a lot of collaboration for all of us to work together. All of us at San Francisco Travel are committed to keeping you informed, providing you with key resources, and making connections that spur collaboration. That's why we're determined to host today's forum. To get this morning started, I want to introduce our first guest speaker, and I'm really grateful to have Adam Sachs, who is the president of Tourism Economics, which is the industry's most relied upon and respected research firm. We've had the pleasure, many of us, of hearing Adam over the years, and I cannot tell you how important Adam's perspective is, especially now in this time where everybody's asking, what's going on? What can we expect? And nobody really knows except Adam, maybe. They use comprehensive data about economics, demographics, policy, and more to create a detailed model and predictions that can help us prepare for the future. I am so pleased to have Adam joining us today and honored that he could make time in his schedule for our forum. He gets requested to do a lot of these, so I really appreciate his ability and willingness to participate with San Francisco Travel today. He is very much in demand right now and has clients all over the world asking for his input. If you have any questions while Adam is speaking, please add them in our Ring Central chat, and our Chief Marketing Officer, Howard Pickett, who you just heard from, will try to get to all of them in his brief question and answer with Adam at the end of the presentation. So it's my honor again to present Adam. Adam, this virtual stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's good to be with you all in these unusual circumstances, and appreciate the kind introduction. I don't know if it's that no one else knows what's going to happen, or if that it's that no one else has the audacity to actually try to predict what's going to happen right now. But here we are, and this is the job in front of us. I'm going to share with you perspectives on both what we see happening in the economy and its effect on travel. So let's get started. 2020 is indeed, we could say it's a year to forget, and in so many ways, right? Looking strictly at travel spending, you can see the severity of the decline in international. We're expecting a decline in travel spending between 70 and 80%, almost an unconscionable drop. Overall travel spending, because domestic is not nearly as hard hit, is going to be down 45% for the year. Importantly, kind of taking that long view that Joe alluded to, the recovery does actually take shape in a rather brisk way. While it's fair to say that the economic recovery is U-shaped, once travel does begin to resume, once we get through the kind of the teeth of the crisis proper, there's going to be quite a lot of pent-up demand, and particularly as you look to the second half of 2021 and then into 2022 as the economy begins to get its full footing as well. So if we can go to the next slide, looking at the data on a weekly basis, you get a perspective for how this recovery, and indeed we are in the midst of the recovery, although it may not feel like it given the number of steps forward and steps back that we have encountered. On the whole, we have continued to recover. You can see that weekly travel spending in the U.S. Bottomed out in April, and then in May began its decline. Once we hit Memorial Day, people started taking their vacations, and we saw it in the data. The most recent data through the week of August 1st showed travel spending was down 48% from a year ago. Now, of course, the declines are most severe in group and meetings and business and in international. But nonetheless, a good pickup off that floor that we experienced in the spring. When you look at it by region, on the right-hand side, you don't see a whole lot of differences across the region. They're all following the same shape. The only thing that stands out to me is that the Northeast is underperforming, and that has to do with the dominant presence of major urban centers. You go to the next slide. Thank you. The differences in performance, they cut a number of different ways. One of the ways that it cuts is by chain scale of hotel. And there's quite a lot of disparity here when you look at the underperformance of upper upscale and luxury in the US, and then the relatively benign performance of the economy and mid-scale, in context of what's going on in the overall market. And so, those properties, sort of your Days Inn, Best Western, and Hampton Inn are actually overperforming relative to those upper upscale luxury. Why is that? Well, it has to do with, of course, exposure to the group market, really concentration in urban markets of those upper upscale luxury markets that's causing them so much harm right now. It also, performance across the country is cutting by the type of destination. So it's not only the type of property, it's just in general the type of destination that is being offered as far as experience. And the least impacted states have been those that tend to be rural without an urban anchor to them. And so Mississippi, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Idaho, Montana, rounding out the top 5 performers recently. And then those that are hit the hardest, of course, are those that are anchored by urban centers, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, Nevada, and California is within that 10 most impacted states list as well. That's travel spending. Looking on the right-hand side, hotel occupancy, very similar profile of major urban center and states there underperforming those that are in more rural settings. So it just reflects the way that people are behaving right now and where they're traveling. So let's pivot a little bit to what's going on in the economy. I'll show you the first indicator that I trust got all of your attention, maybe about 10 days ago when the BEA released its release on second quarter GDP. Fell by 33%. That is an attention-grabbing drop. Keep in mind that that is an annualized number. It means that if the economy continued to be at that level for 4 quarters, it would equate to a 33% decline in the economy. It doesn't mean that the economy actually contracted by a third. It actually contracted over 2 quarters by just over 10%. Still terrible by any means. And you can see that there is no historic precedent going back to at least 1947 in a single quarter. But I say it's historic. It's also meaningless. You can go to the next slide, giving a sense for the historic nature of it. If you look at that, kind of that true drop over 2 quarters of 10.5%, it begins to approach what the U.S. economy experienced in the demobilization after World War II. Thankfully, nothing close to the Great Depression, but more than double the impact, peak to trough, of the Great Financial Crisis. So it's historic, but it's also meaningless. Why is it meaningless? It's because there wasn't anything structural about the economy or a bubble that caused this. It was simply a self-imposed lockdown of the economy and consumers and businesses behaving in response to that. That really drove the severity of that drop in the second quarter. So the question really is, where are we now and where are we going? That's, of course, much more meaningful than what happened in the second quarter. So where are we now? Well, we are absolutely in a plateau phase of the recovery. So you can see just in terms of jobs indicators, whether I'm looking for postings or hours worked, a variety of other high frequency data that's much more telling than the monthly BLS data. See, things began to pick up as the economy began to open up, and steady growth in the labor market through May and June. But you can see things have leveled off in July, and that was evident in the most recent release from the BLS for the month of July. So we see a plateau there in the labor market. And as a result, we're at this stage where, while we've regained some jobs, we're still off at about 15, I think now 14 million jobs relative to February. So it's still quite a lot of damage to the labor market. If you go to the next slide, we're looking at right now unemployment claims of 30 million, adding about 1 million a week. So there's churn in that. So we're not adding 1 million a week to unemployment in total, but you can see that there's still a lot of weakness in the labor market, with over 1 million claims per week coming in. So if things are plateauing, where are they going? Let me share with you a few perspectives on where we think we're all headed. We've made it through what we would say is the first phase of the recovery, which is where, as things began to open up, we saw it in the June data. The second quarter data for GDP is a little misleading because June was actually quite good, while May and April were atrocious. So phase one, June, July, August, we're going to see some strong economic growth as the data come in. But as we move to the latter part of the year, we'll see things begin to taper off in terms of the rate of growth. A lot depends on how things unfold with the virus itself. And so there are risks to the downside of this forecast. But nevertheless, even in our baseline forecast, as I'm showing you here, the outlook for the U.S. economy is below the pre-virus path of the economy. That is, we never get back up to where we would have otherwise been. So our baseline forecast is that GDP is going to fall 4.2% this year. It's going to rebound 3.9% next year, right? There's a 40% probability to that as we measure it. But what else could happen? And I think it's right to think about, while we develop 5 scenarios, these are the 3 most likely that we're seeing right now. On the downside, you can easily envision a scenario where the recovery fades as infections remain sort of out of control, although they have come down notably around the country over the last several weeks. But if that were to continue uncontrolled, and it would result then in lockdowns in different parts of the country, you could get to a scenario very easily where next year actually the U.S. re-enters recession with a 6% decline. Now, we only assign a 20% probability to that. We update this every month, right? And I would say over the last 2 weeks, the risk of this has actually abated somewhat, and I would place it more in the range of 10 to 15%. On the upside, and there is an upside scenario, which is that scientific advances actually speed up the return to normal. In this scenario, GDP doesn't fall as badly this year, increases more briskly next year. Again, only half as probable as we see it into our baseline forecast. But if we do see these advances, both on the therapeutic and treatment side and on the the actual vaccine side, you can see restrictions being eased more quickly and confidence rebounding really briskly, and markets responding favorably in that scenario as well. One of the reasons we're relatively positive about the U.S. not going back into recession is the sheer scale of stimulus that has been thrown at this crisis. If you take everything that was passed in response to the great financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, those are those blue steps, each individual bill. It adds up to $2 trillion. Compare that to what's already been passed for the coronavirus crisis. We're at $3 trillion already, and it's extremely likely we're going to top $4 trillion before all is said and done. So we're looking at double what is being put to work, and hopefully acting as a catalyst for the U.S. economy. A lot of that is stabilizing the U.S. economy right now, and whether it's unemployment claims or subsidies and bailouts, all the things that are on the table right now, they all help to stabilize the economy and position it for growth as things begin to open up. Employment is going to follow very much the same path as GDP, where we see this initial rebound in employment, and indeed we did see that in particularly in May and June. I think we'll still see employment gains as we go through the year, but then things do level off, similar to GDP. We don't get back to where we were, and we're looking at a reality where unemployment is notably higher than it would have otherwise been. But a point I want to make about the labor market and its effect on travel is that, similar to the great financial crisis, the impact on the labor market has been concentrated on the lower end of income earners. You can see here the share of workers who can telework by wage level. And indeed, as you go up in income levels, you're more able to continue to work without having your job disrupted. And we see this in where the job losses have been most acute, in hourly wages and low income jobs. And so as a result, it means that those households that tend to travel the most are actually less affected. And therefore, as we get to opening, the damage to the labor market should be less of a factor than it would have otherwise been if different income groups were affected at the same rate. So our main travelers are going to be closer to whole than those households that tend to travel less. This is just a bit of a schedule when we've marked out in our forecast when different segments begin to recover. So right now we're in this nascent stage of recovery where domestic leisure drive travel and some leisure fly travel is picking up around the country. It's what's sustained that growth that we've seen over the last few months of the summer. The secondary phase of the recovery is going to be in, we believe, not until 2021, the first quarter. And the reason it's that late is because I'm sure that you've all been, tracking this. Even groups that were hopeful to meet in the fourth quarter, the vast majority of them are canceling or have already canceled. That's even pushing a bit into the new year. And so what we're seeing begin to take shape in the first quarter of 2021 is essential meetings and business travel, small and medium-sized events, and then regional international. That'd be primarily Canadian and Mexican border travel. It's not until the second quarter and the second half of 2021 that we begin to see the realization of recovery in larger events and long-haul international. So this pushes out really the starting points of these recoveries, not the full realization of those recoveries. We see volume of travel getting back to prior peaks in 2023. The performance by destination can vary quite a lot as we look to the future, and to some extent, you overlay sort of when group is going to come back and when international is going to come back. You can imagine that those cities that are most exposed to domestic markets and transit leisure markets will tend to be more stable and more resilient during the downturn. So I took the top 25 markets, added some Canadian markets to this, and looked at what share of room nights are generated by domestic visitors and what share is by transient, mostly leisure visitors. Basically saying if you're in the upper right-hand quadrant of this matrix, you're less exposed to international and you're less exposed to group. All right, so you'd see, kind of a mix of markets in the upper right-hand corner. San Francisco, we see it here in the lower right-hand corner, which means that you're in relatively good shape in terms of your exposure to the transient market. More than 70% of room demand transient, and then about 28% group. But you do have a significant share of international visitors that occupy room nights, and so that's part of the gap that you're going to need to fill over the coming year to help sustain the recovery. And that's an important point when you think about a matrix like this. This is 2019 data, right? It's not static, right? It's very likely that San Francisco is going to move into that right-hand corner, and then sort of becomes the marketing strategy mandate to accomplish that, to fill in those international room nights with domestic visitors. Right, there's a lot changing in the domestic market. This is intent to vacation over the next 6 months from the Conference Board. It's fallen from 55 to 34, but it's stabilized. And of course, a flip in terms of mode of travel, with the majority planning travel in the future based on drive mode of transport, and a big fall in fly. So that affects where we orient our marketing strategy, particularly over the next 6 months. A more high frequency survey, this is weekly data from Longwoods International that I track on an every week basis. And it's telling us two things that I think are really important. One is that 1 in 4 of respondents are switching from a fly trip to a drive trip. And so that, of course, changes where we market and where we develop sales strategies for groups in the near term. But also, we see that 1 in 5 respondents are switching from an outbound international trip to a domestic trip in the US. That means, I really can't over exaggerate this, because the incidence of people that were actually planning an international trip is likely not higher than 1 in 5. It means that everybody is. Anybody that was planning an international outbound trip in the US is converting that to a domestic leisure trip. And we're seeing signs of hope in the domestic market. People are spending money more in all of the major categories that we care about in the travel industry. Of course, they haven't rebounded as much as consumer spending overall. That's to be expected at this point, as travel still does remain restricted in parts of the country. Nevertheless, you can see rebounds in food and beverage, recreation, lodging, and air. So all headed in the right direction. But I asked the question to myself: what happens if indeed all those would-be outbound trips get converted to domestic trips? Is that enough to offset the loss in inbound? The answer is yes. Actually, it's more than enough to offset the loss in inbound, because in 2019 there were 97 million outbound international trips by U.S. residents, and there were 79 million inbound trips by international visitors to the U.S. So if you basically swap those out, taking it as a reality that we're receiving almost no international inbound right now, and we are sending almost no international outbound right now. If those outbound trips get converted to domestic, actually it'd be a surplus in trips in the US. It's a little bit less in terms of spending. It's about 10% off in terms of spending. Nevertheless, it's a real opportunity for San Francisco as you begin to think about filling in those lost international visitor room nights. So I'll share with you, just as we kind of round the corner toward home plate, our forecast for San Francisco. Starting here, we expect visits to recover to 70% of their peak next year, with full recovery in 2023. That's a really important point, because it means that as dire as things are right now, once you get to particularly the second half of next year, industries, companies, you're going to be able to have enough to work with where while you may not be operating at full mast, you will be at enough of activity where you can begin to function on a normal basis, particularly as we move through the latter part of 2021. You can see we're very close to whole in terms of visits in 2022. We get there in 2023, as I mentioned, volume of people. Now, spending takes an extra year, right? And that's, as Joe alluded to, 2024 is when visitor spending comes back. So spending is getting hit harder, partly because you have more stability on day trips and visiting friends and relatives, and people are, because they're traveling from shorter distances, they're not staying as long, they're not spending as much. And so the spending recovery is going to take longer. The drop is more severe this year as well. And then I wanted to show you the shape of this on a monthly basis as well, particularly because it's even on a room revenue basis, things start to look much more positive as we get to the second half of next year, where we're about 70% of room revenue by the end of 2021. Now that does presume the introduction of a vaccine in the first quarter, and then that having the effect of opening up travel and increasing confidence. So here are just a few final thoughts. The recovery has begun, notwithstanding some of the risks that we're seeing right now. The economic recovery is plateaued, but should accelerate as the virus is contained and we make advancements on the science side of things. Performance by destination, it's just going to be incredibly disparate over the next 9 months. We expect San Francisco to approach normalcy in the second half of 2021 with full recovery on a revenue basis in 2024. And that timeline is very much a function of what happens with the pandemic, your ability to pivot to those markets that are recovering more quickly as well, particularly those drive and those leisure domestic markets. So thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to stay with you for as long as you'd like.
Thanks, Adam. We really appreciate it. We had one question in the Q&A, and that was, how does your forecast change if for some reason the second stimulus is not passed until after the November election?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is a risk. Right now, we are expecting something particularly on the unemployment side in terms of subsidy of unemployment insurance. If that were not to be passed, we would see a drop in consumer spending, especially. We could also see the market react negatively to that. And now, it would not be our downside scenario. It does not imply recession. It just means that the recovery completely stalls out until, indeed, either we get to that point in early 2021 where it becomes clear we're going to have a vaccine, or eventually that stimulus does get passed. But if it doesn't, if there's no stimulus passed of any kind, I see the labor market and consumer spending stalling out.
Great. Thank you very much, Adam. I think that was the only additional question. So as usual, we really appreciate you being here and all the wisdom that you always impart. And we'll go on now to the next part of the presentation. Thanks again, Adam.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Brett Aller, our Senior Director of Research and Marketing Strategy. And Brett will give you the forecast that we're putting out today for visits and spending and the hotel and convention forecast. So Brett, you want to turn on your computer screen and unmute your mic?
Yes, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So we're going to get started basically talking about lodging supply. If you go to the next slide, there's an agenda there. We'll touch on supply just because it's been having a really big impact on lodging statistics year to date from an occupancy and RevPAR perspective. Then we'll get into the forecast quickly about methodology and some of the assumptions which Adam actually laid out for us a little bit in his presentation. We'll take a look at convention room night pace to get a feel for what that looks like over the next few years. And then we'll get into our lodging forecast as well as visitor volume and spending. We'll take a quick look at domestic inbound from last year to get a feel for, I think, where the markets are going to come from now that we're looking at a really heavy drive market as we move forward for the next several months. So the next slide is actually our first look at the market in general. So this is the San Francisco San Mateo market. It includes parts of Marin and San Mateo County as well, or the coastal county. And current supply, so we're looking at pre-COVID, right? 419 hotels, 54,000 rooms. The temporary closure of 60 hotels and almost 15,000 rooms is being tracked. This is all coming from STR's supply database. If we take a look at kind of what percentage of rooms right now are off market, in the broader market, we're talking about a 27% of total room inventory that's out. However, most of those rooms are in the city center. So when we back out the city from these numbers, that closure number drops to below 6%. So we're not seeing a lot of closures in the broader market. It's mainly impacting the downtown market, which we'll take a look at on the next slide. But overall, the construction final planning numbers have not changed greatly since we looked at this prior to the pandemic. So we have not seen a lot of change in the pipeline, which I think is a positive. If we jump to the next slide, we'll see what it looks like for the city. We're just taking a look at a little bit more detail in downtown, right? So we started with 231 hotels, 34,600 rooms. That was pre-COVID. We were really close to that number. We were tracking 552, so it's off by 48 rooms. But you see the temporary closures, 52 hotels tracking and 13,000 rooms. That's when we looked at this report last week when I did the slide, but it changes really daily. We got a weekly report from STR today, and the closed hotels have gone from that 13,700 up to 15,000. So it is moving around a bit. STR is tracking closures based on hotels reporting that they are being closed and that they're closed for an entire month. The only other way they can set a hotel to close is if the hotel's just not reporting data for that time frame. SFTA is attempting to track closures as well. It's not easy. It's a lot of phone calls and checking online. Rory has been doing a great job kind of heading that up for us. But we're tracking almost 20,000 rooms sold current, or 20,000 rooms that are temporarily closed right now. So it's a difference of, from what, 40% closed to 58. So it's a pretty big swing. If we look here at what's in the pipeline, again, we haven't seen a lot of changes. The Line Hotel has actually switched to January 2022 as of yesterday. So that got pushed back. The AC Hotel is the other hotel that's in final planning. You can see the list of hotels that's in planning. The Chase Center is still in there. The Langham is still in there. Some of these, they're in planning, but we haven't seen any kind of prep of the site even yet. And then there's the 5 unnamed hotels with 500 rooms spread out amongst them. The one in here that it's a little bit confusing for me right now, it's switched to deferred, is the Marriott Mission Bay. We know it's under construction. In fact, the building's, it's got several floors constructed already, but it's listed as deferred, which means it's currently paused. I don't have more information on that, but if anyone does, it'd be great to hear on that. The Waldorf Astoria is another construction site. It's an active site, but the site's been put up for sale. The first sale fell through, and I know right now the second sale is kind of in process, but been delayed because of the pandemic. And then the Holiday Inn, it's actually switching to the Kimpton Fisherman's Wharf. It's the main building of the Holiday Inn. At 174 rooms has been switched to unconfirmed, although I believe that was a reno project. So we expect to see that come back online. We can jump to the next slide. This is really just to give you an idea of how we've seen the supply change in the city since the pandemic started. I know the lockdown was mid-March, but STR tracked full inventory for that entire month. But you see the fall off in April. Right now, the dip biggest for us from a supply perspective was in May. June showing a little lift, but again, these numbers change every time a new monthly report comes out and STR gets more good data. So this could continue to shift around a bit. The next slide is really Airbnb, just to give you a feel for what's happening in the short-term rental market. This says Airbnb supply. It's AirDNA data, so it also includes HomeAway. And their supply is really flat year to date because of the gains they had in Q1 of increased supply. But you can see it also being impacted in April and May. And we only have May year to date information from AirDNA. Our next slide, please. Just wanted to give you an idea of what we're facing, because as you heard from Adam, the economy, mid-scale, and upper mid-scale hotels are not being as impacted as the upscale, upper upscale, and the luxury product. And we have a lot of that product in the market. 60% of the hotels in the market, not including the city, are in those classes. And if you just boil down to the city, it's 80% upscale. And we have seen some shifts in the percentage of rooms that are available in those categories, with luxury and upper upscale closing more properties temporarily than some of the lower tiered hotels. But we fully expect that we will be coming back online with our inventory back up to those pre-COVID levels that you see from 2019. Our next slide. This is our lodging performance year to date for June. We have San Francisco City and County at the top. That first number, occupancy at 44.6%, is really tied to the current supply that STR is tracking in the market. So that holds that occupancy up a little bit higher. The line below that, we're looking at it as if there were no supply changes. So think about it with the same 34,500 to 600 rooms available. The occupancy does drop almost a little over 10 percentage points. And you can see the impact on RevPAR as well. So currently tracking, a drop of over 61.5% RevPAR in the city. The other neighborhoods that we have listed here, Union Square, Soma, these are with supply changes. Unfortunately, I don't have the data to back out all the closed hotels for this process. Not Financial District, Nob Hill, Fisherman's Wharf, these are all smaller neighborhoods with fewer properties. And so many of the hotels have closed in those areas that STR can no longer aggregate the data. So they're not reporting right now on those properties. The Civic Center is a larger, Civic Center Van Ness, it's really everything west of Van Ness, right? A larger area, so more hotels reporting there. And we threw in the Airbnb data that we have. It is, again, it's May year to date, not June year to date, but get a feel for really occupancy holding up better than the hotels. The ADR is really flat, and RevPAR not showing nearly the same drop. So obviously Airbnb is faring a little bit better than the hotels, at least year to date May. And then we have these areas outside the city. We know San Mateo, Redwood City, and SFO, as well as the San Francisco area, are all part of that broader market that we looked at from a supply perspective. So there's more hotels in those areas that are economy, mid-scale, upper mid-scale, that are going to hold up a little bit better. The same is true for the Oakland, Berkeley, Hayward market. So we don't see necessarily the same drop in occupancy for the East Bay. Sonoma County is another county that has a lot of these lower tiered hotels, and occupancy we expect is going to hold up a little bit better. Go to the next slide. I want to give you an idea of not just what it looks like year to date, but what's happened monthly. This is looking at demand from a number of rooms sold. So it's not necessarily tied to an occupancy of rooms available. The ADR number is what it is, and you can see it's everything kind of bottomed out for us in April, similar to what Adam was showing on his slides. What we're really focused on here is that revenue line, and it went down in April. We haven't managed to get it up above 90% below last year just yet. Now it is trending up as the other lines are, and we know July is going to come in better than June as well. So we have some hope moving forward that this number is going to continue to improve. But this is a pretty dramatic drop that we've seen year to date. I wanted to show you the same information that we have from an Airbnb performance perspective. Again, this is all product with Airbnb, so it includes all types of Airbnb, including shared spaces, although those are really minimal in total for the market. But you can see the same kind of fall off starting in March when the lockdowns happened, April, and really continuing down in May for Airbnb. So not bottoming out in April, the same as the hotels have done. Now we get into our travel forecast. The first slide is really just going to talk a little bit about methodology. This is all the data that goes into our lodging and visitor forecast. We work closely with Adam's team really at Tourism Economics to put these numbers together. But we pull lodging statistics from STR, but also from TravelClick and the AirDNA data that we get on the short-term rentals. We have flight volume available, which has really fallen off dramatically. Obviously, group sales statistics are is our own information. We have international inbound data that we also get from Oxford Economics. Visitor profiles help tell us what people are spending their money on when they're in the city, as well as length of stay information. Then obviously we talked a lot about the supply changes, economic conditions from Adam and his team, as well as their forecast model. So jump to the next slide. We're going to look at, these are the current assumptions that we're using within our forecast. So again, similar to what Adam mentioned earlier, but talking about from a virus perspective, progress being made against the disease, allowing for gradual easing as we move through the rest of this year. And then the potential for vaccine or other substantial progress in Q1 and Q2. We assume no group business in 2020, but starting in Q1, we see small groups gradually returning, right? And that's improving as we move into Q2 and hoping for potentially some citywide business in late Q2. But again, all that is tied to, performance against the virus. Everything is. From a leisure perspective, we know we're seeing leisure travel in the city, even though technically we're not open to tourism in San Francisco, but the numbers continue to improve, and we're seeing short-term pickup on the weekends at the hotels that are currently open and operating. Business transient, don't expect a lot of business travel the remainder of this year, but again, we assume gradual easing as we move into 2021. And we know business travel is one of the pillars of our market, along with group and leisure. So we're lucky we have these, these three pillars that we can lean on. The one problem is the international business. We don't expect that to return. And as we get into the visitor volume forecast, we'll talk a little bit more about how much longer we feel that'll take before it comes back. MOSCONE room nights. So we usually base our forecast off of MOSCONE because it really drives compression, which drives ADR, which in a market that runs 80% typically, it's all about compression, right? Well, that's not the case as we're moving forward. Obviously, 2020, a real lack of compression, huge cancellations. I think we're looking at this year alone, over 731 room nights canceled because of COVID. At one point, 2020 was at 845,000 room nights on the books. So it didn't look quite this bad 6 months ago. You see the history with 2014 being the high watermark. 17 and 18 are 2 years that were really impacted by expansion work happening at MOSCONE, but our sales team did a great job of still selling events into the space and working around the construction dates. 19 was the huge year coming out of expansion and also having a lot of repeat association business that doesn't come every year but is more rotational returning. So it was kind of a really great year for that, as well as our annuals returning. You can see 21, 22, 23. As we move forward, these years are a little bit lower than where we would like to be right now. You know, the Oracle cancellation, which happened at the end of last year, impacted all future years that we're looking at here to the tune of 60 to 80,000 room nights a year. We also had an IBM cancellation. They canceled because of COVID this year, but other reasons for 21 and 22. That was another significant event, over 50,000 room nights a year. So we've had a tough time booking against these cancellations. I think this year new bookings are at 138,000 room nights. So we are still seeing bookings, and the meeting planners that we've talked to or that our salespeople are in touch with really firmly believe that there's demand for in-person events and that this business is going to return. And we can jump to the next slide. Just wanted to give you a peek at what's happening in 2021. 4 events canceling so far, January through April. There's a lack of confidence early in the year. We're seeing date changes. 5 events have already moved out of the first half of the year and into the second half of the year. That's about 123,000 room nights. We know there's a risk that this is going to continue to happen, at least early in the year. And then we also feel like there's risk as we move into the latter half of the year of shrinking room blocks. We're not confident, and the planners aren't totally confident that they'll be able to, the same attendance numbers will be reflected as what we've seen historically. And most of our room blocks are blocked to history. As we get more information, we'll adjust that. So here's a look at our lodging forecast. We have a couple of years of history in here just for context. And you can see in 2020, this is the forecast that has supply changes included. We have supply basically returning to pre-COVID levels around Q4 of 2021, and then exceeding that in 2022 as some of these hotels from the pipeline start to open. But occupancy this year at 41.5% at year end, that's on this less supply, a 50% drop. The rate holds up a little bit better, but most of that is coming from the months that were not impacted by the pandemic. So January and February, very healthy rates, really low occupancy the rest of the year at lower pricing, but the average rate holds up, but almost a 60% drop in RevPAR year over year. 2021, it's showing big growth, but you see the numbers, 65% for this market is not something that we're used to seeing. Even the 76.5 in 2022 is a low number. The average rate in 21 is more impacted by the pandemic than 2020 was, because we don't really have any months where we anticipate the same kind of compression we felt early in the year this year. But again, a lift in RevPAR of 46% year over year, and then what 2022 looks like as well. Returning, but not back up. So the next slide that we have actually shows what the forecast looks like with no supply impact. So if we kept supply the same, what would it look like? And these percentage changes that are on this page are looking at percentage change to 2019 as well. So it gives you a good feel of what we think the timeline looks like as we move forward. But yeah, 64% drop, and you see the occupancy drops from above 40 down to 29.5%. A 71% drop in RevPAR. We feel like this is really a good look at realistic numbers. And then next year, again, occupancy slips a little bit. The ADR doesn't look quite as good. The RevPAR slips a little bit. But 2022, because the supply is flattening to pre-COVID, these numbers don't change a lot for us. Similar to kind of what Adam showed, this is the lodging forecast from 2007 through our current 2022 number. These numbers are in billions of dollars. That's the room revenue just in the city and county of San Francisco. I just wanted to give you a look kind of what's happened over time. And you can see the great financial crisis and the impact that had on 2009 with a 19% drop. That's the only double-digit drop you see over this entire time frame. 17 was impacted by MOSCONE, so that was a little bit of a slip. But the 71% drop in 2020 is really striking. Obviously, the pandemic's had a greater impact than any other event that I've experienced in the city. And we were here for 9/11 as well. We haven't seen anything this impactful. And obviously, the growth coming out of it is much greater, but that's just because of the trough that we're in currently. So we're going to go into our visitor volume and forecast, as well as spending. And we start with this slide that's looking at the region. So the region for us, we're looking at San Francisco, we're looking at Marin, the Peninsula, the East Bay, as well as wine country. And in 2019, we kind of can look at this as our high water mark because it was a record year after years of solid growth from a volume and spending perspective. So $57.7 million is what we achieved, or I'm sorry, 57.7 million visitors achieved in 2019 across the region. You can see the split there, day on the bottom and overnight on the top. And then a $19.7 billion spend, getting close to $20 billion. And again, you see the split with overnight, obviously much greater than the day spend. And then 2020, obviously our volume plummets. We're down 52% across the region. We were seeing day drop 49%. The overnight's more impacted at 58%. The spend is falling 67%. These are the exact same numbers that I think Adam presented, although they were for the city. The region closely follows the performance of the city and county as well. But day spending down 54%, overnight spending down 82% year over year. So we look at visitor volume across the region to recover by 2023. It's really going to be driven by day spending. And you can see how that improves from a percentage perspective. It's driven by day volume, as it grows faster than the overnight on this slide. And then spending recovering, we actually show it later than 2024. I know Adam said 2024, but we expect it to be early in 2025 when we'll get back up to those 19 levels. The next slide just breaks the regional down by overnight. Same volume and spend, but here we break it down by international and domestic. So it's segmented by international and domestic, with international on the bottom, domestic on the top in blue. Again, 24 million overnight visitors in the region and $17 billion spend. 2020, the overnight volume, you can see falling 58%. International is down 70% in the region, domestic 54%. And then we look at the spend, international spend, because of the length of stay mainly, a 75% drop, domestic down 62%. Again, overnight volume recovers later than total volume, looking at 2024, and it's driven by domestic, as international is expected to still be below 100% of where 2019 ended. And the spend recovers, again, we're talking about later than 2024. Day spending does recover in 2023, but the overnight spend we're expecting to be only around 96% when we reach 2024. And again, that's because of the international travel really being less than 100% still. The next slide and the next few slides are going to focus on these three markets outside the city: the Peninsula, the East Bay, and wine country. This first slide we'll look at is just visitor volume in total. So it has day and overnight on it. You can see the Peninsula in 2019 peaked at 10.7 million visitors. In 2020, we're looking at a drop in day visitation of 41%, overnight visitation down 56%. This is the one market out of the three that's heaviest in overnight travel, with 43% of their volume pre-COVID. The East Bay for 2019 hit a peak at 7.5 million, but in 2020, They're seeing day visitation drop at 60% and overnight at 52%. This is the heaviest day visitation as a percentage of total. Well, they're heavier, I should say, than the peninsula. Wine country is actually the heaviest, with 63% pre-COVID being their day visitation. The wine country did hit 9 million in 2019. This year, we're seeing a 51% drop in day and a 58% drop in overnight. The next slide looks at total spend. So again, this is broken down by day and overnight. Obviously, the overnight drives the spend. 3.8 million for the peninsula. We're seeing a drop of over 70% spend on the overnight side. And they're the heaviest, as we mentioned, from an overnight perspective, with 87% of their spend pre-COVID coming from overnight visitation. The East Bay, $1.4 million in 2019. Again, we're seeing a drop in day of 64% and overnight of 62%. They're closer to even between the two, and it really kind of will help the East Bay come out of recovery a little bit faster than the other markets. Wine country finished at 2.9 billion last year. We're seeing day down 56%, overnight down 68%. They're one of the heavier overnight markets from a spend perspective at 83% pre-COVID. So the East Bay definitely holds up better. It's less reliant on international overnight, which we'll see as we get into the next slide. So visitor volume overnight. You can see the peninsula in 2019 reached 4.6 million overnight visitors. It's down 56% this year. International is down 74%. The East Bay is, or I'm sorry, domestic is down 50%. This is the heaviest international market out of the three, with 25% of their visitation being international pre-COVID. The East Bay, that peaked at 2.9 million last year. We're seeing a drop of 70% international and domestic down 50%, but this is the heaviest market for domestic travel. Out of the three, 94% pre-COVID was domestic. So they have a really small percentage of international travel, which is, again, it helps the East Bay come out of this faster than the other areas. Wine country, 3.4 million is what they peaked at in 19. We have international dropping 69%, domestic dropping 55%. They are heavier in domestic with an 81% pre-COVID. The next slide we have breaks down into the overnight. International and domestic. The peninsula, this is spend. The peninsula at $3.2 billion is what they peaked at in 2019. They're seeing a 78% drop in international, 58% drop in domestic. Again, one of the heavier international markets at 51% of spend in the overnight. The East Bay, 2019 peaked at $1.1 billion in spend. International, 75%, domestic, 58%. Those are the drops that we're experiencing this year. Again, they were heaviest in domestic spend at 63% pre-COVID. And then the wine country for 2019, 2.4 billion in spend. 2020, we're seeing a drop in international of 74%, domestic 62%, making up that 68% drop. And this is the one market that's really flat from an overnight spend perspective. You can see in 2019 how even it was between international and domestic. Now we're into just the city and county, visitor volume and spend. Again, I apologize, a lot of these slides are really similar. Total 2019, so this was our peak in the city, 26.2 million visitors. 2020 is dropping down to 12.3 million. So it's a significant drop, 53%. Days down 48%. We included international and domestic all on one slide here. So this is the domestic overnight that you see that's tracking in the yellow. International overnight, 67% drop, domestic 58% drop. San Francisco is the one market in the region that has the heaviest international at 28 to 29% overnight pre-COVID. Again, we're looking at total volume returns in 2023, with overnight volume returning in 2024. Again, it's all driven by domestic and day travel. You can see the international does not really get back as a percentage of total on this slide, and we don't anticipate that happening until sometime in 2025. The next slide is the visitor spend. Again, just for the city and county, 19. The total $9.6 billion is our high watermark. 2020 drops down to 3.1 billion, so a 67% drop. Days off 53%. The international travel is down 72% from a spend perspective. Domestic 65%. And again, this was the heaviest international market. You could see 53% of the total spend coming from international travel, and we just don't get back to that number again until probably 2025. Day spending returns by 2023, as does the domestic overnight. So we'll see that return a little bit sooner. But total spend, 96% in 2024 doesn't quite get us back to 2019. And that's again driven because international is only at 90% of pre-COVID levels by 2024. So we look at 2025 as being the year where we'll get back to that peak of 2019. And then the last slide we have is our domestic inbound. Just to give you an idea of where we think the travel is going to come from over the next really 6 to 9 months. Obviously, state of origin, our travel is California, 42% of our domestic inbound overnight travel. And this is all courtesy of Longwoods International. And this is their most recent data, which we received in July. And then you see the DMA origins, right? And obviously Bay Area and Sacramento, we're going to rely a lot on these areas just surrounding the city. And then we expect to see, visitation return from Los Angeles and New York as more flights get in the air. With that is my last slide. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brett. Appreciate that. Our next presenters now will be taking us in a little more detail on the international markets and what we're seeing and forecasting there. So without further ado, let me introduce Hubertus Fonke and Daniel Schwartz from our tourism team. Hang on. There we go. There's Hubertus. And there's, he'll introduce Daniel in a minute. Hubertus.
Thank you, Howard, and good morning, everybody. As Howard mentioned, what I am going to do over the next couple of minutes is take a little bit more of a detailed view of the international market that Brett has given a high-level overview on. Before we go into the forecast portion of that, I just wanted to quickly take a look at how the international market has performed for San Francisco leading up to the crisis in 2019. And as you can see here, we've seen consistent growth over the last few years, basically seeing record numbers year after year, ending the 2019 with another record year in terms of visitor volume from all international markets. Similar picture as we look at the visitor spending from all of our international markets. In fact, between 2014 and 2019, international visitor spending increased to $8.5 billion. Again, that was a record number that we have seen over the last few years. So a little bit of a more sobering picture as we look at the direct impact of the pandemic as it relates to visitor volume and also visitor spend. Again, we're seeing, and it was mentioned before by Brett, a sharp decline for 2020, almost 67 or over 67% in a drop in visitor volume. Obviously, that doesn't come as a surprise as travel has pretty much halted from international markets, and we don't really anticipate much international traffic for the remainder of the year. As you look at the subsequent years for 2021 and forward, we are seeing a bit of a sharp increase again in visitation, or expected, and taking into consideration that this is largely based on assumptions at this point. However, as Adam had indicated before, we do know that there is pent-up demand, and we do know that international travel will come back. So hopefully we'll see that trend take place in 2021 and then in subsequent years as well. So based on what we currently know, we are expecting a 65.3% increase in visitor volume for the next year, and then a little bit of a more flatter increase over the subsequent years. This is similar to the visitor spending as well. You know, it's almost a 67% decrease in visitor spending directly through the impact of the pandemic in 2020. However, as we look at 2021 and forthcoming years, we do see a relatively sharp growth again relative to international visitor spending. I apologize for the busyness of this slide, but what we wanted to do is really show, and you know, we've done that in past years, look at our top 10, sometimes our top 15 international markets. And what I wanted to show here is where we really see major changes relative to visitor volume and to visitor spending over the next few years. So if you look at the first two bars, the orange or red bar and the light blue bar, those are the 2019 and 2020 numbers. And as you can see, as we look at visitor volume, Mexico, China, Canada, and the United Kingdom float to the top. But then if we compare that against the actual visitor spending, it doesn't come as a surprise that that order is changed slightly. And that is really kind of consistent with how our markets have performed prior to the crisis, that markets like Mexico and Canada tend to be very high in volume, a little bit lower in visitor spending, whereas China, the UK, and some of the other European core markets tend to perform better in terms of the visitor spent. We hope that that trend will continue. Again, a lot of it is assumptions at this point, but we do anticipate that those key markets that we have seen really outperform our market mix before will come back over the next few years. Here, what we wanted to show is basically three moments, key moments in time. 2009, which is right after the great financial crisis, then 2019, the last year before the pandemic, and then a 10-year horizon, 9 to 10-year horizon from now to 2029, during which we do anticipate, barring any other global events, but during which we do anticipate obviously a full recovery of visitors, international visitors come back. And here it is no surprise that Asia, including China, obviously, will drive, along with Europe, the long-term visitor volume, the recovery of the long-term visitor volume. We also see that Asia will continue to gain market share in visitation, whereas other markets like Australia, New Zealand, some Latin American countries, as well as Canada, we do anticipate a loss of visitor, a share of market share in terms of visitor volume over the next few years relative to the recovery. Similar picture as we look at the projected share of visitor spending. Here it becomes clear that Asia largely outperforms Europe, for example, in terms of visitor spend. And again, that is a trend that we have seen for years leading up to the crisis. So we anticipate, hopefully, that will come back to some original pattern. Canada, Latin America, and Australia and New Zealand, again, are expected to lose share of visitor spending over the next few years. Here, we wanted to just show you that how San Francisco is likely to index against overall visitation to the United States. And as you can see, we're pretty much in line with what the overall visitation to the United States will look like, even with historical data leading up to the crisis, but also coming out of the crisis over the next few years. And here we're comparing San Francisco visitor volume against some of our key competitor markets, including Los Angeles, San Diego, Seattle, New York, and Chicago. And again, it's pretty much in line with how these markets performed leading up to the crisis and emerging out of the crisis over the next few years. So some key takeaways here. As was mentioned by Brett and by Adam earlier, we don't anticipate major international visitation for the remainder of 2020. We do expect international markets to begin to rebound in 2021, but we don't expect these levels, the 2019 levels, to be met before 2024. The international visitor volume is going to reach, or we're expecting it to reach, pre-COVID levels by 2025, visitor spending by 2024. We do see some short-term opportunities over the next couple of years, especially in Mexico, Canada, and some of the European core markets, as you could see how these markets will evolve over the next couple of years. But obviously, short-term international visitation will largely depend on easing of travel restrictions, macroeconomic factors, and availability of a vaccine. And the long-term recovery will be driven by China, India, Korea, and other European core markets that I had mentioned before. As Brett had mentioned, normally San Francisco sees about a third of its overall visitor volume to be international, but making up almost 2/3 of the overall spend. That trend will probably continue over the next few years, but again, it will take a number of years to get back to those levels. We do have detailed breakdown market by market, so we're available to provide you with that, should you be interested. And with that, if we don't have any questions, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Daniel, who's going to provide some key insights on some of our key markets. Daniel?
Thank you, Hubertus. Good morning, everybody. Happy to see so many people on the call. That was terrific data, and I think everything's been pretty consistent across the different presentations today. What I'm going to do is add a little bit more context to the international recovery. I think one of the most used phrases lately, I don't think overused, but definitely one of the most used, has been, this is a fluid situation. And I think because indeed we are in a world where from one month to the next, circumstances can vary widely. And so it is absolutely difficult to plan ahead. I think it's very telling that even tourism economics has different recovery scenarios. You know, that's something new. With that in mind, in addition to providing data, we decided to provide some insights on the booking behavior, on travel trade landscape, on segmentations and general trends from key markets around the world. Our methodology for this was pretty simple. We leveraged our network of international reps who truly have their finger on their pulse, are talking to clients regularly, and here are some of their findings. So first question is, are we seeing any significant changes in booking behaviors? Next slide. And the answer is yes. First, you can go to the next slide. First would be yes, we are. For one, seasonality has really changed. Let me just wait to get to the next slide here. So seasonality has really changed. No longer are well, at least for the time being, tour operators and other travel providers are saying that people are not traveling during the typical times, and those peak times, whether it's a summer vacation or a winter holiday from markets, that is completely out the window. They're booking all different times. Employers are saying people are taking vacations at all different times. So seasonality is really changing. In addition, we're seeing some more last minute bookings from some markets such as Germany. And that's very important, as well as we're seeing the booking curve shortening for Korea, and UK are seeing a lot of travel bookings that are much longer and is out of that peak season. Next slide. In addition, so what are we seeing? Oh, sorry, that's backwards. And in addition, what about types of travel? Are we seeing demand for any different products? Yes and no. Some examples are more tailor-made. Small groups from markets such as China and Korea and other Asian markets have really been reporting a lot of tailor-made specialty groups, smaller groups, of course, obviously not longer groups. And similarly, unsurprisingly, a lot of consumers looking for outdoor and adventure activities. Finally, road trips. They're not only a domestic phenomenon, so we're hearing a lot about road trips in California and people taking road trips domestically within their countries, but as people are traveling internationally, they're still using car to go around their destinations. Fly and drives, therefore, will be even more popular. So next slide. What are a couple strategies that we might want to consider based on this? For one, beyond SF packages and promotions will be really critical. We're certainly doing that. We're working with Napa, Sonoma, Monterey, Tahoe, all of Northern California, and even beyond are going to be really important to work together to attract travelers. They're going to have more time and they're going to be in the car and wanting to visit multiple destinations. And second of all, you're going to really want to make sure whether you're a hotel or tour supplier, museum, that your product and rates are in the marketplace, not just in one category of booking providers, but across the board with OTAs, with wholesalers. One question I have to many of the hotels are, do you have rates for 2022 ready for contracting? This is something I've been asked recently, and if you don't, it's something you definitely want to consider. With that, next slide, we'll move to the next question, which is what segments will recover fastest? Who should we be targeting? So a few answers here, and we've heard a couple different feedback from the offices. Next slide. To begin with, we're seeing millennials and Gen Z feel more comfortable to travel. This is reported out on research that we hear every week from destination analysts and others. VFRs expected to come back. But overall, the most constant result we're getting is that luxury is the segment that will be recovering quickly, and that will be the greatest opportunity for a lot of destinations. This obviously makes sense if you look at a lot of the economic data from around the world, that luxury is going to be in a position to start traveling and spending more than other segments. Next slide. So just to drill down on luxury a little bit, in Canada, we've heard that the middle class, or it's going to be more luxury focused or more budget conscious for Canadian travelers in the coming year. UK did some surveys with travel agencies, and most of them reported that they expect the premium market to recover quicker. Australia gave some great data on some tour operators. That luxury, they didn't cancel their trips, they just put them on hold. And in China, they're still seeing a lot of luxury spending in malls, goods, and other places. And luxury tour operators are feeling bullish as well. Next slide for the final question, which is the travel trade landscape changing? Overall, can I go to the next slide? This is a mixed answer. Some markets have reported major changes, some not. And in other instances, the COVID crisis is really an accelerant speeding up trends that already existed, where in other countries, it's not really making a big change. So in Korea, they're reporting that tour operators are transitioning even faster to a shift to really mobile and digital platforms across the board. In Germany, the traditional trade is understood to be more important than ever, especially compared to OTAs. And just a notable statistic that Canada found in their surveys is that 43% of operators are expecting to conduct FAM trips or be willing to take a FAM trip as early as the first quarter in 2021. So this is definitely something to consider for destinations and other products. I know that we at SF Travel are thinking about this. Next slide. Quick note on OTAs versus kind of travel advisors, these two critical components of the travel trade, supply chain, travel trade landscape. Both are going to be critically important across key markets. And we've seen a lot of data supporting that both of those areas are growing, that travel agencies are going to see possibly a bigger share, especially in areas like luxury, which will be recovering quicker. So, that's an opportunity if you're looking to target the luxury markets. On the other hand, OTAs and meta searches have been reported to see higher shares of traffic in comparison to direct hotel and airline sites, which is kind of the opposite trend of the way things were going prior to the COVID crisis. Before that, we were seeing more direct hotel and airline bookings. So definitely those are two channels that you want to stay engaged in, no matter which segments you're looking at. Both will be very important. And final slide, a note about receptive operators, your inbound operators. These will continue to be some of your most important clients, and for a few reasons. Number one, they can generate short and long-term bookings. They can get business on the books at a time that you really need that. Connectivity, they have multiple ways to stay connected. Some of them are low maintenance. Once you're connected with them, they'll just drive bookings for you. And they are easy to keep in touch with using associations such as IITA. I recommend getting involved with them. They're a particularly good resource for understanding these inbound operators' priorities and needs at the moment. And in general, inbound operators are really outstanding sources of information as they see the booking trends from dozens of markets in real time. So talk to them, understand what their priorities are, what their needs are, as they can really help position you to recover your international markets as quick as possible. Other ways of obtaining information about international markets, talk directly to your clients abroad. If you have them, they want to hear from you. More information, we always love to hear from you. And at this point, it's a pleasure. I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker. She's a close friend and colleague of mine. Between promoting SFO's germ-killing escalators and amazing international terminal, you can find her mountain biking in the Oakland Hills. It's my pleasure to introduce SFO's Director of International Marketing and Aviation Development, Melissa Andretta. Hi, Melissa.
Hey, Daniel, thank you for the nice introduction. Yes, Daniel's actually a really good friend of mine, and while we don't bike together, we do ski together, and he is probably one of the best skiers I know. So thank you for that great intro. I'm here today to give a quick update on SFO. I'm not going to talk for too long. And I think, we've seen slides and we've sort of heard about the impact in different industries. Obviously, for the airport and airline industry, this has been huge. I would sort of argue unfairly huge, because when you actually look at the data about catching COVID on a flight, it's fairly low as long as you're wearing a mask and stuff. But that's a discussion for another day. So I think the easiest way to illustrate kind of where we went from at the airport side is I'll start with a photo of myself. Because there you go. This photo was taken, this was my last flight before we went into shelter in place. I was at Denver Airport with my friends coming back from a skiing trip. Everything was great. The next flight that I took after that was actually a couple weeks ago to the East Coast, and there I am on my most recent flight. So times have definitely changed. Also, sort of looking back to the next slide, you can see an email that I sent on March 16th. And if you go to the next slide, when you look at sort of the first line, it seems like it's going to be another uncertain week, but we will get through it. That's pretty much become the theme at the airport and at SFO since that day, March 16th. So I'm going to walk you quickly through some of the numbers at SFO. So next slide. The number 44, that's the number of international carriers that we had before shelter in place started and all these flights started canceling. At our lowest point, which was a lot of people's lowest point, which was mid-April, we went down from 44 to, next slide, 3. So we definitely went down. Those 3 carriers you can see on the next slide. I would encourage everyone to, if you're flying these carriers or thinking of flying these carriers, please do give them a thank you if you know anyone who works for those airlines. These are the 3 international carriers that continued flying from SFO, even at that sort of darkest, lowest day. And that's EVA to Taipei, Korean to Seoul, and United to actually a few different international destinations. If you move forward to right now, many of those carriers have come back, which is great news. We have 19 carriers of the 44 back at SFO. And if you take a look at the next slide, you'll see who those carriers are. So this slide, I think, is really important as you're sort of looking to the future and when international traffic is going to sort of return. These are the carriers that are already back. And a lot of these carriers, if you take a look at them, are Star Alliance carriers, because we're a very strong Star Alliance airport at SFO. And when you think about, which sort of countries are maybe going to be recovering a little bit quicker when it comes to international travel, this is a really good slide to look at because the flights are already in place. Now, are they daily flights? Most often not. Sometimes it's only a couple of times a week. But as we heard in an earlier presentation, once things, start getting resolved a bit more and we have the vaccine or we have some better, drugs and things like that, these airlines are pretty much ready to go. It's not going to take too long for them to turn from, 2 times a week to a daily flight if the demand is there. So that's the good news. Moving to the next slide. Down 97%. So at our lowest of lows, we were down 97% in terms of passengers at SFO, which is crazy. Passenger seats, so low. This is if you look at other major airports in the US and even around the world, this is pretty typical. Sort of that 95, 97% mark was sort of pretty average, I would say. If you go to the next slide, though, the good news is we're now up to down 82%. So I was talking with one of my colleagues, and I'm like, we're still down 82%. How do you spin that? So putting my marketing hat on, I can safely say on the next slide that we have 6 times the available seats that we had at our lowest of lows. So, you got to look glass half full when it comes to seats. And I think the big thing is we're constantly talking with all these carriers, pretty much all 44 of those carriers, to see when they're comfortable coming back. And there is really sort of a good energy at the airlines and a willingness to come back. So much of it really just has to do with the government regulations, and once those sort of start changing a bit, I think we'll see a lot more of those carriers return to SFO. So on the next slide, these are just some graphs that sort of show, and you can see sort of the big dip, that's around April, and you can see sort of a slow climb. And this sort of shows domestic traffic, international traffic, and then sort of the grand total. And you can see a bit of a difference for sure between the domestic and the international. We think that will continue for a while, as we've heard in other presentations. Domestic is certainly going to be the traffic to return first. And then in terms of international traffic, it's going to be the markets that have a lot of visit family and friends sort of traffic that will sort of recover sooner than some of the others. But the good news is you can see sort of a slow and steady climb with those numbers. The next slide shows, this is our security checkpoint volumes. So again, sort of a precipitous drop there. More kind of in the March area, and then a slow climb up. I look at this every day, and if you go to the next slide, to me, it looks like a monster with a big mouth. And my goal working at the airport is to close that mouth as much as I can. So we are sort of in full throttle in terms of our aviation development efforts and talking to as many carriers as we can, sort of seeing where they are, sort of encouraging them when they are ready to come back, that we will support them at SFO and have sort of marketing support and PR support at the ready. So that's sort of what we're spending a lot of our time on right now. Go to the next slide. You can see SFO, we really sort of sprung to action pretty quickly after shelter in place went into effect. I think everyone at the airport was very aware that this was going to be something very big and that we were going to need a very solid sort of recovery framework in place. So this is something, it's an actual document that we can share. It's available, and it's sort of our internal, how we are going to go from recovery to resilience. That's what we're calling it. It's a framework. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you sort of the phases of recovery that we have. And I'm not going to read through all of these things, but basically we have sort of 3 phases of recovery. We're still in that managed COVID-19 risk right now. If you look at some of those bullet points, we're still very much in that realm. So there's 2 more phases to the recovery that hopefully we'll get to sooner rather than later. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see sort of the goals and objectives that we have as an airport. And these are very broad goals, but they sort of, everything that we're doing at the airport are related to these goals. So we want to improve the passenger confidence in traveling through SFO. That's key. That's really important to get the passenger confidence back up. So people feel comfortable going through the airport, people feel comfortable flying on these flights. We're working with a lot of airlines on this as well. Goal number 2, we want to enhance the safety, health, and well-being for airport commission employees. Goal 3, ensure the financial recovery, stability, and vitality of SFO, as well as our business partners. Goal 4, care for and support our community. We have such a big community at SFO, not only at the airport, but everything sort of related to SFO, our community, and the local workforce. And then finally, we're looking to the future. You know, things like this might happen again. This is an opportunity for us to learn and to really build and future-proof the airport. So that's a big focus also. Going to the next slide. We've come up with a sort of umbrella brand called Onward and Upward. And this brand is sort of everything that we're doing in terms of recovery that we're putting out, both internally and externally, will go under this Onward and Upward brand. And the idea is, you know, we're an airport, even like at our lowest of lows, when we were 97% down, we're an essential service. You know, some of these flights we're bringing in PPE. You know, there have been a lot of repatriation flights at SFO. We're always sort of moving onward, and eventually we'll get to a place when people are traveling en masse again, where we'll be heading even more upward. Under this sort of umbrella brand, we have some sort of sub brands right now. We have a Travel Well campaign. If you've been at the airport, you will have seen a lot of the Travel Well sort of stuff. We have a Welcome Back campaign. For every time a new flight comes back, we do a big sort of social media push, a paid push, to really welcome them back and let people know that the flight's back. Even if people are not able to travel so much, it's just good to welcome them back, and it's good for the airline. It's good for brand awareness for the airline. And then we also have the thank you campaign in place for the carriers that stayed with us, and also sort of a thank you to like everyone who is working and keeping the airport open and running well. If you go to the next slide. This is just some of the creative, and we can go through this quickly. This is some of the really nice stuff that our own in-house team created at the airport. These are some signs you'll see if you're at the airport. Go to the next slide. This is part of the Travel Well campaign. We really, you know, sort of decided, okay, you know, we have to wear masks, and SFO was great. You know, we were like sort of the first airport in the US to say you've got to wear a mask. But how can you express yourself? Well, you can express yourself through your hands. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see some more of the creative there as well. We have people, you know, sort of expressing how they're feeling in a fun way, as fun as possible, you know, during COVID, and also being very safe and wearing their mask in the airport. If you go to the next slide. This is just a press release showing kind of how early we were to the game in terms of requiring masks at the airport. You can see that's from April 21st. So we were really a leader when it comes to airports and making sure everyone was wearing a mask. You know, I feel like, you know, I've been traveling these last couple of weeks, and I've been at some airports where like, I feel like half the people aren't wearing masks. So again, SFO like really sort of ahead of the game, and really, you know, trying to make it as safe a place as possible for our passengers. Go to the next slide. This is just sort of a clip from a animated video that we made that's now running in our terminals. And this is also a video that we're sharing with our carriers, as well as with some international markets. There'll be some translations of this video. And it's really just a quick 1-minute video showing all the interesting things that we've done at SFO to keep people safe. And it has a nice little San Francisco sort of feel to it. You can see with the seal and someone wearing an SF hat there. On the next slide. This is an example of our Welcome Back campaign. This has done really well for us on social media. Whenever a carrier comes back, we welcome it back. We put a nice paid spend behind it. It's really been, especially in sort of those early days a couple months ago, where it seemed like all the news was bad. It was nice to have a little bit of good news, and it seems like both people in the Bay Area as well as international travelers have embraced it. And there's a lot of sort of this, you know, we might not be able to fly now, but wow, I can't wait. You know, next year, I'm so glad ANA is back because I really want to go to Japan in 2021. We get a lot of comments like that, so that's really nice to see. Moving to the next slide. Just another example. Here's one, Philippine Airlines. It performed really well. You can see all the likes and comments there. Next slide. We're also working with SFTA, which is great, to produce a lot of content that we can share with these carriers. A lot of the carriers right now are like, we don't want a ton of marketing dollars from you because the numbers just aren't there. But what we do want is to be telling the story about SFO and about San Francisco and how it's handling the crisis, so that when people are ready to travel, you know, there is a good feeling that San Francisco is doing all it can, as well as SFO. So this is just sort of a picture of a short video that we made with SFTA that we're now sharing with carriers and hoping that they will share on their own channels. Next slide. We're also doing a ton of calls, as all of you are, as we are right now. This is a call we had recently with, we're reactivating some of our international agencies. This is the agency in Korea. And we're really talking with them about what sort of stories can we be telling right now as an airport for, you know, for the future, for 2021 and beyond, when people are going to be comfortable with traveling to the US again, so that they do choose SFO. Like if they do have a choice, like how, you know, which way they're going to come into the country, we want it to be SFO. So we're getting a lot of good feedback from these agencies, and we've reactivated quite a few of them, both in Asia as well as Europe and Canada as well. These are just some of the headlines that we're seeing. For airports, this is really going to change how airports brand themselves. Like SFO is never going to be the same airport that it was in March 2020, and we know that. And it's going to be a battle to get flights back. So you can see some of the headlines there. Some airports like Philadelphia are taking really aggressive measures to get some of these flights back. Even locally, like we see San Jose, they're definitely putting a lot towards getting some flights back as well. At SFO, you know, we are probably going to be somewhere in the middle of the pack. We're lucky with our location, but we know that we're going to have to fight to get a lot of the flights back that we had before. So it's going to be really interesting, sort of how we brand the airport and how we get some of these flights back. Right now, some strange things are happening. For instance, Dallas Fort Worth right now is the world's busiest airport. And we had a call last week with Denver Airport. Denver is so busy right now, and really that has so much to do with just their locations in the middle of the country, right? People are traveling domestically, they're not traveling so much internationally. So these two airports are like jam-packed with people, where SFO is maybe not there right now because we're a coastal airport. Same with like the JFKs of the world. So it's going to be a really interesting time, and it will be fun and challenging in a way to sort of get us back to the amazing numbers that we had before this all happened. Go to the next slide. So the big question is, like, you know, forecasting, what can we say? It is so hard to say, and it's so hard to say with flights. You know, like I said, we're talking with all these airlines all the time. I can't tell you the number of times where an airline has told us, okay, we're going to start flights again in 2 weeks, and then like 2 days before they're supposed to start, they're like, we can't do it. Or the other way around, like we've heard airlines say, oh, we're not going to start until September, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we think we're going to start in July. So it's kind of it's a wild west out there. A lot has to do with the government regulations. But the good news, I would say, is, you know, between airports and airlines, the relationship maybe has been a little bit awkward in the past, and this is across the board. I can say, like, in these last 5 or 6 months, we've had more conversations with airlines and more conversations with like the top people at airlines. And the airlines are just excited about getting back and starting service again. And they've been working really well with the airports to try to make it as seamless as possible. Also, we're talking with, you can just keep it here. We're also talking with a lot of airports as well about creating sort of safe air bridges. And this is the concept where SFO will have, you know, certain standards that the other airport has as well. And we sort of agree to those standards so that the passenger feels very comfortable, like moving from point A to point B. So those discussions are happening right now with quite a few of the major international airports. Finally, sort of silver lining of, you know, this terrible experience, we've had quite a few silver linings. If you look at the next slide, that's a picture of me, our airport director, and some of our team at SFO in Vietnam last year. For many, many years, we've wanted nonstop flights to Vietnam. This is at Vietnam Airlines headquarters. And we've been talking to them for a really long time. Well, what happened a couple months ago was Vietnam actually, for the very first time, not only flew to SFO, but flew to the United States, a nonstop flight from Vietnam. And that was a repatriation flight. So if you go, you can see on the next couple of slides a few pictures from that. Lots of headlines, lots of attention. And what's nice about this is not only were they able to repatriate all these citizens back to Vietnam, but they became very familiar with SFO and sort of our operations. We've made a lot of good connections with them. And we're already having discussions with them about, once this is over, having a daily flight on Vietnam Airlines, which would be fantastic. That's something that, would be really exciting for the city, really exciting for the airport. And there's been other carriers like this as well, other carriers that have done some of these repatriation flights that were not carriers at SFO before. So there are opportunities, things will change, but we have a very sort of positive long-term outlook at the airport for sure. There's just a few more photos that we can end with here. And that's it. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them now or to email me, give me a call. We always love to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. We really appreciate it. Now, our last presenter is Lynn Bruni-Perkins, our VP of Global Marketing Communications, who will show you some of the exciting work that we're doing in terms of our recovery marketing plans. Once Lynn's done presenting, then Joe will come back and have some closing comments, as well as John Kimball, our board chair. So, Lynn.
Hi, good morning. I miss seeing all of your smiling faces, but I know that we're all looking forward to the day, one day soon, when we can all be together in the same room and be celebrating San Francisco together. So just a little bit about the recovery marketing plans and where we are today. First of all, we have a 3-phase communication strategy. So phase 1 was really March, and we focused on safety, utility, flattening the curve, really getting that message out that we need you to stay at home at this time. Phase 2 was April through about late June, and that was really about inspiration and making sure that we were still relevant while people weren't traveling, giving them activities that they could use during isolation. We created puzzles, we created virtual tours, just like many other destinations did. We saw a lot of engagement on our website with that content. And then there's phase 3, and this has been kind of an interesting thing because when we originally developed these plans, we thought it would be very 1, 2, 3, but right now we're kind of in a hybrid. So instead of being all about being open, we're just talking about what is open, since we did pause our current opening plans in San Francisco. So we're focusing on, the restaurants, outdoor dining, the different attractions such as San Francisco Zoo, Pier 39, Alcatraz will be opening very soon for an outdoor experience. So a lot of our content is focused on that, but a key piece of that is we're really talking about the safety measures that are in place, and welcoming people back, but really encouraging them to follow all of the safety protocols. And I'll go more into that because we do have a Safe Traveler Pledge too, that we have seen a lot of engagement with. So what are the objectives of our recovery plans? Obviously, to restart the tourism economy in San Francisco. We've seen all the numbers. We know it needs as much help as it can get. And a big part of that is collaborating with all of you, our key partners, to leverage content about San Francisco, to talk about those safety measures and protocols that are in place, and to remind people that San Francisco is still a very special place to visit. And then we will also be establishing some new metrics for success. Obviously, we're not going to be at the levels of engagement and levels of website traffic and room nights that we were before, so we need to establish new benchmarks. But we're also taking a look at how our programs have actually affected the recovery and doing some measurement around that as well. So what are our triggers to move forward with the campaign? So first of all, we need the Bay Area to be open for business. So the communication has been based on the state's phases, and But the key piece for us to really go full bore and start spending some funds is when the state allows leisure travel. As you've heard, not all of our hotels are open right now, and leisure travel to hotels is restricted. So we're really waiting for that moment when we've got the product in place that we can really fully market the destination. In paid channels. We are using our owned and earned channels to talk about those things that are currently open, even though we can't fully welcome leisure travelers into the destination. We're also looking at when travel restrictions will be lifted by both countries and corporations, so that will happen from an international perspective. A big piece is whether or not consumers are ready to travel. So we're really following very closely consumer sentiment to make sure that we're not wasting our dollars when people just aren't ready to get out and leave their homes yet. And then as Melissa was talking about, we're also working very closely with SFO when flights start to come back to start promoting the domestic first and then the international and those flights that are available and open and welcoming visitors. We do believe that the markets will return with leisure first, small business, and then large group, as I'm sure you've been hearing in all of the research from multiple sources. So what are some of those key consumer insights? We do know there's pent-up demand. Some consumers are showing some readiness to travel. We saw a little bit more positive numbers from destination analysts in June. It definitely took a dip as we have started to experience the surge. But we're actually seeing some younger visitors now are more open to be inspired by travel, and they're really more ready to travel. Boomers, not so much. They're more likely, they're more apprehensive. They're not really ready to leave home yet. Obviously, as you've been hearing from a lot of other research, people are focused on closer to home. They're wanting experiences with open spaces, parks, and outdoors will be most attractive. Thankfully, even though we are an urban destination, we have a lot of outdoor experience that we can promote, and we've been working really closely too with SF Parks and Rec to really create some great content around the wonderful parks that we have and the opportunities for urban hikes and ways to be outdoors without having to be in congested areas of the city. And then we want to ensure that our messages need to invite and reassure on safety. So as I talked about before, a lot of the focus of our communications has been around our safety protocols and encouraging people to always wear masks, to socially distance, etc. So our first, what we called our first wave, although what has happened is wave 1 and wave 2 are going to probably overlap just based on the way that the phasing is happening in terms of the opening of business, is really to support the local economy, encourage our locals to take staycations. When the hotels are ready, we'll encourage locals to take the staycation and stay in a hotel in San Francisco. Be a tourist in your own backyard and explore the neighborhoods and outdoor spaces. And then again, what's open and the safety measures. So we've been building this content out now on our website, and obviously the word fluid has been used many times. We're getting more and more information about some of the different protocols that are being used in the restaurant industry and the hotel industry. MOSCONE Center is building out theirs. So as we get more of that content, we continue to update it and make sure that we have the most relevant and up-to-date information for visitors as we get it. We will also have a campaign landing page for the locals that's more about local experiences. And we also want to ensure that our partners are updating their content. So either through the portal or through Google, just making sure that we have as much content about what's open and what you're doing to ensure visitor safety is really important to us. A key piece of both Wave 1 and Wave 2 is what we call the celebrity campaign. So this was by far probably one of the most favorite projects that I've worked on in my time at San Francisco Travel. And the concept was to utilize some local celebrities to share their love for the city and encourage them to come and visit, locals and others in California and beyond, and help restart the economy. We would leverage the celebrities and great city content to develop a 90-second video showcasing the best of the city. And there are several other videos of various lengths. And I'll share with you in the next slide who we were able to have participate in this program. Very exciting. the most exciting part was that we were able to cut a 60-second spot to use in the International PGA event broadcast this past weekend. And we're in conversation right now with NBC Sports to also run this kind of more sports-focused version of the celebrity video. So who participated? Hunter and Lexi Pence, and actually, interestingly, Lexi is quite a YouTube influencer and has a very large social media following. So she's been great to have it participate along with her husband, Hunter, who we all know are one of our favorite giants. Francis Ford Coppola generously also donated his time, as well as Steve Kerr, and then Mayor London Breed was a participant as well. So how are we promoting all of this different content that we've been developing along with the celebrity video? As I mentioned, not so much in paid channels at this time, simply because we want to ensure that the state has allowed us to be open for leisure travel to county, and also to ensure that the sentiment is in place that people are willing to travel and we're not just wasting dollars when people aren't going to leave their couches. So we're primarily using organic, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. We're also leveraging, of course, our own website, sftravel.com, and this is an opportunity for us to showcase our partners, showcase what's open, and we're using a lot of user-generated content. So that's been a great way, and also reaching out to our partners for some of their own content. So we recently did a call through Joe's twice weekly email, which we internally call the coronagram, for partners to submit images of outdoor dining with masks or experiencing your businesses safely with distancing and protocols that are in place. And that's been really, really helpful for us, especially since most of our team is kind of spread out, East Bay, North Bay. Some of us are in San Francisco, but it's really hard for us to capture that imagery. So anything that we can get from you and your social channels is super helpful in promoting the city. We're doing our weekly leisure emails, and we've had a lot of engagement with those, especially during the period where we were providing content for ways to shelter in place and things to do while at home. But we've seen a really a large increase in engagement with all of our leisure emails. And then, of course, through the PGA broadcast, and I'm going to go into just what the reach of that broadcast was in a couple of slides, but that was a huge win for us, and we were super excited that they provided that opportunity for us to showcase our PSA. Q Digital is an LGBTQ media partner of ours, and we are able to leverage some display banner assets and video that we had actually created prior to shelter in place, just to keep San Francisco in front of their users. And then, of course, through earned media, press releases, not so much local FAMs quite yet, but when we're ready, we will start doing some of those. So what you're going to see next is the celebrity campaign video that is more of the sports focus, and this is what was developed for the PGA. I just want to note that it depends on what your own internet speed is. There may be a bit of a delay, but we will send out the links to this with the presentation after.
The city supports their sports teams so tremendously. Getting the opportunity to play for the San Francisco Giants has been an incredible honor and an incredible gift.
San Francisco is just an inspiration in and of itself. The energy there, the people, the architecture, just so absolutely breathtaking.
San Francisco is bursting with things that people love to do.
I love coaching in San Francisco because I think it's the most beautiful city in the country. There's this beautiful love for basketball that exists, just electric.
I get my inspiration from being around folks all over the city.
The physical beauty is really special.
I find inspiration in the people.
San Francisco is just a special place.
San Francisco has always been associated with the joy of life.
So how did the PGA Championship perform? So internationally, that PSA was aired in 164 countries, reaching more than 500 million households. And I'll tell you, on Thursday, the first day of the championship, it was really exciting. I got an instant message from a friend of mine who lives in Spain who said, I just saw your great ad in the PGA broadcast. And it just, I let the team know, and that was really exciting to hear just from somebody who's living abroad that they saw the message and it resonated with them. It was the most viewed PGA Championship since 2010. And actually Thursday's first round marked the largest opening since 2015. And CBS came out on top in the ratings on Sunday evening for the championship. They hit a hole-in-one with a 1.0 rating, so that was very exciting. It was viewed in front of an estimated 5.6 million viewers on Sunday for that final round. And I'm super proud as a UC Berkeley alum that Colin Morikawa was awarded the winner. Really great for all of us locally to have somebody from a local university win the championship. San Francisco is truly becoming a golf mecca. In 2021, we will be hosting the USGA Women's Open, and in 2033, the Ryder Cup at Olympic Club, with the 2028 PGA Championship in between those at the Olympic Club, as well as 5 years of Steph Curry's PGA Tour. So lots of exciting events to look forward to in the future. So wave two, which I said wave one and wave two are going to kind of overlap because we're really waiting for that moment when the hotels are open and ready to welcome leisure visitors. So Visit California actually negotiated a very heavily discounted media rates for us, plus a 20% match. So we were able to bring in partners, Visit Oakland, the Mount Diablo region, and United Airlines into this co-op who are helping us in funding the paid media campaign. We are going to be targeting about 70% of Southern California and 30% Northern California in our media. As Brett showed, LA is a strong feeder market for us, and United would also like to see some of the flights coming from Los Angeles into San Francisco. The start date is a little bit of a moving target right now. It's been pushed a couple of times to August 31st. We're definitely crossing our fingers that we'll be able to go live then, and the team is working on getting all of the pieces together for that campaign, which is coming together very nicely. So the consumer messages during this wave two, it's really targeted on the entire state of California, and it's calling all Californians. Our gate is open. So we're really going to push the messaging around the destination being fully open and safety measures in place. We have developed a Safe Traveler Pledge, and I encourage all of you to go to our website. You'll see a couple of banner at the top of the website and near the top about what's open. And if you go to that page, that's where you can go and take the Safe Traveler Pledge. We have over 350 people who have signed that pledge. And it's just a pledge that they'll travel responsibly. They'll take locals into consideration when they come to the destination. They'll wear their masks, they'll do their distancing, and they'll have an eye to sustainable travel as well. So I encourage you to please go to our website and take that pledge. A lot of our messaging is also going to be around exploring the neighborhoods, obviously our unique experiences in the outdoors. Like I said, we know that people want to be not in very crowded places, so this is a great opportunity for us to just talk about our wonderful distinct neighborhoods and opportunities to go to places maybe a little bit more off the beaten path, while also keeping in mind that we've got wonderful product like Pier 39 and other large attractions. And then of course, SF is the gateway to the Bay Area. So as I mentioned, we're going to be promoting Visit Oakland and the Mount Diablo region, as well as Wine region and Monterey region and Yosemite. We're so blessed to have such great experiences all around us, but use San Francisco as that gateway, and then we can push them out to some of the partners who are outside of the city. The timing for all of this is hopefully based on how things phase with the state, the August and into the fall. So again, our media channels here are our paid media channels through the Visit California Co-op are Adara, Sojourn, Facebook, Instagram, and Expedia. And then of course, many of the same channels, earned and known channels that I mentioned previously. Again, we're hoping to have NBC Sports play that's like a 60-second PSA for us as a trade buy. So this is the other version of the celebrity campaign video that promotes Our Gate is Open.
The fact that San Francisco is about, helping humans and not always thinking the same way, I think it inspires this birthplace for great ideas to come.
The one word I can describe San Francisco is just, it's so majestic. As the city reopens, I hope everyone continues to look out for one another and continue being kind and leading with their hearts.
One of the things that San Francisco should be extremely proud of is how strong they've been through all of this, and let's just stay strong.
San Francisco has always been associated with the joy of life. Each time we get a different kind of person, we get another seed of innovation. And that's what San Francisco has, is a joining of different cultures, of different ages. It is a hotbed of innovation.
For me, coaching the Warriors, feeling the energy from the crowd, and then being able to enjoy, driving across the Bay Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge and seeing the ocean and seeing the views. I've loved every moment.
I find inspiration in the people, in the diversity. I find inspiration in the excitement of going to restaurants, hanging out with friends, enjoying the community. We welcome you back to San Francisco.
To enjoy the majestic city.
And our gate is open.
Our gate is open.
So thank you, and we very much look forward to welcoming visitors very soon.
Thank you, Lynn, and thanks to all the speakers for really making a great program today. A lot of information. Not all good. There's a lot of, we're all in marketing and sales, and we like to make the best of things. And I think it's important that we realize the reality of what's happening this year and the struggles that we're going to have to come out of this. But it's important to remember that we will come out of this, and we will be back where we were and past where we were before. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration. It's going to take a lot of cooperation and working together like we've never worked before. But I'm totally confident that San Francisco will regain its dominance in the tourism industry, and that all of us will be able to benefit from it. So the key is getting the information, sharing the information, and collaboration. We must work together in order to get out of this, and we will. So as I said at the beginning of the forum, all attendees will receive a survey about today's event, and we'd greatly appreciate your feedback. And so don't forget, if you want to get copies of today's presentation, you must complete the survey. So please do that, and hopefully you've got a lot of information out of it. So to close things out, I'd like to hand the virtual mic over to our board chair, the Marriott International's area general manager and the general manager of the St. Francis Hotel, John Kimball, to close the program. John, thanks for being here, and it's always great to see you.
Thanks, Joe. And yes, hello, everyone. Fill that survey out, because I know you want the data, and there's been great content today, and candidly, hope you appreciated it. I have to say that the facts are kind of stark, and it's okay to be concerned. And I think I understand it, I believe it, but I encourage all of us to stay optimistic. And clearly, there have been some great success stories in this crisis. I have found it genuinely heartwarming to see and hear how so many of you are making it through this really unique moment in history here in San Francisco. So I think if nothing else, the crisis has demonstrated the importance of connections in our community. We've seen businesses working together, working with the city, working across neighborhoods and even regions to find and keep our doors open. So I appreciate all of that effort. And I encourage all of you, just as Joe said, to keep working together, keep our network strong, stay active in organizations just like San Francisco Travel. I know there are many competing concerns and Zoom calls to address right now, but I promise you those challenges will be better faced if we all work together as one. There is light, and I believe there's light at the end of this tunnel, but it's a little challenging to find out exactly when that is, and that's clearly been a theme today. For now, the best thing we can do is follow the public health guidance, continue to collaborate, do our part. And today we heard from some great leaders and who will help us through with that guidance. So stay healthy, be kind, have faith. We are a resilient industry and a truly tight-knit community. And truly the most innovative cities in the world that we all get to say is our home, and we will get through this together. So on behalf of the entire San Francisco Travel Board, thank you for joining us today. I wish you well and look forward to seeing you in brighter days ahead. Have a great day.
So thanks, everyone. That is the end of our show, and we appreciate you joining us. And again, we hope that you'll take the survey so that we can get great feedback from all of you on this and make the next version of the Forecast Forum even better. Thanks very much. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Chat. Should we open the chat?
Just click it in me.
Is it? Have we answered all of them? Okay.
If we want to answer any chats.